And it's time now for a media roundtable, and we're joined by the Waldorf and Statler of Golf Channel, Rex Hoggard, Ryan Lavner. Ryan, you might actually have to Google that reference out there. But Rex, you're in Miami for the finale of the LIV team portion of their season. Leaving aside all of the framework discussions and whatever else may happen in this game, is this team event getting any more traction than it seemed to have a year ago?
I don't know that it's getting more traction. Certainly there's more conversation about one of the things I think we always looked at when it came to LIV Golf. And as sports fans, we love the transaction. And they've done a pretty good job of selling that transaction. For example, I'm really curious to talk to Brooks Koepka about what happens to his team next year. One of his players, his brother Chase, is going to get relegated. Another member of his team, Matthew Wolff, doesn't seem like he's going to be around for another year. So there is an element of interest only because who's going to fill out that roster? It seems to me that LIV Golf is not coming after PGA Tour players at the moment. So I'm really interested on that level.
And Lav, speaking of transactions, there's a lot going on right now with, is the PGA Tour going to continue with that framework agreement with the Saudis? Are we going to have private equity now that we are going into this final event for the LIV season? What are you hearing in terms of the current status of that, which I know has been very clouded over the last few months?
Well, I think it's as unclear as ever. We're now just less than 3 months until at least the initial December 31st deadline for the framework agreement to become definitive. It does seem likely at this point that could get delayed. Multiple media reports suggesting as much. And I think the PGA Tour and LIV, certainly in 2024, are going to continue their separate ways. This is going to continue to dominate the discussion over the next 3-6 months until a deal gets done, if a deal gets done. But at least for the time being, the two tours can continue down their separate paths and see where we are, I think, at the beginning of 2025.
Ryan, sticking on that framework agreement, one of the points in that was this idea that the PGA Tour would make good faith representations to allow LIV to be granted world ranking points. And the decision was made last week that wasn't going to happen anytime soon because they're non-compliant. Phil Mickelson, predictably enough, was out there spinning these kind of conspiracy theories about an industry-wide collusion to stop LIV getting traction, getting those points. Does he have a point in the arguments he was making?
I mean, to be clear, it's getting a little bit hard to keep track of all of Phil's conspiracy theories. If I am right about this one, he is essentially saying that the majors are trying to continue that division to keep LIV from poaching all the players on the PGA Tour. I think he is right in the sense that right now, as it stands, after this OWGR decision, it's hard to imagine any PGA Tour players who have any sort of sense of competitive spirit or real ambition in the sport that they would jump over to LIV knowing what they know now and that they're essentially their entrance into the major championships got a whole lot harder. To kind of disprove Phil's conspiracy theory, if LIV wanted to, they could essentially call the OWGR's bluff, make some of the tweaks that they suggested, primarily around the idea of a closed shop and adding more players for potential promotion or relegation, and see what happens. I'm not sure if LIV actually wants to go that direction, though.
And Rex, sticking on that same frame of thought with the OWGR, now that you're on the ground in Miami, you're going to get a chance to really speak to players in person and get their reaction to the OWGR not awarding world ranking points to LIV. What have you heard so far?
Well, I think to Lav's point and what Phil was trying to explain, I think most of the players that I've spoken to since the announcement by the official World Golf Ranking have said that the world ranking points issue was kind of a non-starter anyway, even from the LIV perspective, because they kind of knew that they weren't going to change their format and that was always going to be a hang-up for the rankings officials. The other half of this is, I had one player explain to me that the points have bled off so much that even if they did award points right now, it's probably not going to move the needle that much for a player who would win an individual event like Brooks Koepka did in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago. So I think the bigger idea moving forward, to at least the players I've talked to, is take the world ranking out of the equation. That's clearly not going to happen at this point, and put it on the doorstep of each of the major championships. Let them carve out whatever kind of statistical category they want to, whether if it's top 5 off the order of merit for LIV Golf, whether it's the top 10, whatever the case may be. I think the idea on the LIV side is the major championships are going to be hurt if those players aren't in the field. So it behooves those majors to carve out some sort of exemption for them.
And Rex, something else that the LIV players don't have access to right now is the TGL, the Tech Golf League of Tiger and Rory. The final field was announced earlier this week. So we have a better picture of who's going to be there, where it's going to be. What is your reaction to the product so far?
I think it is interesting. And again, this goes back to what I talked about when Eamon asked me off the top. I think as sports fans, we love the transaction. So now all of a sudden we know who's going to be in the fields for each of the TGL events. Now you want to know who the teams are going to be. Who is Tiger going to be with? Who's Rory going to be with? I think this fills a gap that we've always had in golf, that we've never sort of had that team aspect of it. Lav and I go back and forth as bad GMs of fantasy football teams. That's kind of the fun part for a lot of fans.
Lav, you don't really pay any attention to any team sport that doesn't involve Georgia, but can you see a scenario here where fans will care enough about the team standings in TGL from week to week?
I don't know, Eamon. I still have a hard time grasping the whole TGL. I tend to be a sort of a visual learner. Like, I need to see it to believe it. I'll certainly cover the first one just to kind of get my head wrapped around what we're doing. Can fans kind of invest themselves in this? I don't know. We haven't seen that with LIV necessarily. Is that because of the players who are the captains of LIV and the players who are on those teams? Do they not have the proper star power or the firepower or the attention grabbing folks like Bryson and Brooks were for the PGA Tour? That hasn't necessarily translated to more interest in their LIV teams. I'm a little bit skeptical at the moment, but I think I'm willing to reserve judgment until I actually see it up close and personal. I don't think the product is necessarily for folks like you and I. I think it's definitely tailored to a younger generation, even though I am 36, and degenerate gamblers, of which Rex and I are neither.
Good to know. Ryan, you and Rex both said on your podcast earlier this week that you were big fans of Lexi Thompson in Shriners last week. Do you think that it is a bit of a miss, now that we do know who is going to be in the field at the TGL, that there are no women on that list? You know, I would have probably loved to see like a Mel Reed or a Charlie Hull in the banter that they could have with the players. Is that something that you think maybe could come down the pike at a later date as well? Because that seems like a great way to enhance that product.
Oh, it certainly seems, Kira, like a natural evolution of what TGL is, and certainly what it can become. You know, just like the PGA Tour players are largely concentrated in the South Florida area, predominantly in Jupiter, the exact same scenario is in place for the LPGA as well. It's easy to see, you know, the Corda sisters teaming up, Lexi teaming up. You could have teams involving Lydia Ko and some of the Korean players who have been so dominant on the LPGA over the past couple of years. They're all, if not in Florida, certainly within close proximity, and I could see them making the jump as well. I think certainly in year one, TGL needed to launch with the biggest and the best PGA Tour players, but I could see that certainly being a natural evolution the next 2, 3, 5 years.
Rex, the PGA Tour this week is in Japan. It's a far-flung event. It's limited man field, just 78 players. No cut. And it's a strange makeup of the field because some guys who already have secured status for 2024, like Morikawa, Keegan Bradley, they're in the field. There are guys fighting for that status who are in the field, but there are a lot of guys in this fall series fighting for status next year who aren't eligible for that field, and there isn't room in the field for them, even if they were eligible for it. Is this sustainable, the Zozo, in its current format at this particular time of the year when we keep getting told that every FedEx Cup point out there matters so much?
I had not even thought about this, Eamon, until you brought it up as part of a possible conversation piece this afternoon. I got to be honest with you. You made me mad when you brought this up because I hadn't really thought about it. And the best example is all you have to do is go to the first guy on the alternate list for this week's event in Japan. It's Tyler Duncan, who is probably not going to get in. Right now he's 95th on the points list. There's a lot for him to play for. If he can get inside the top 60, that gets him into the 2 of the first 3 signature events going into next year. There's a guy a little bit further down, NJ Duffy, who's 128th. He even has more to play for. He has his job to play for next year. He's definitely not getting into that event. And I think if you look where it is on the schedule, there's only 3 more fall events after this. And so all of a sudden now this starts to combine, this starts to pile up, and you have guys who are scrambling for their jobs, doing everything they can to keep their tour cards. And you end up with a field like this where you do have players like Ricky Fowler and Colin Morikawa, which is great for Zozo, and that's what the sponsor wants, but it's probably not all that great for the players.
All right, Rex and Lav, always a pleasure. I'm sure we could sit here for hours and hours and discuss, but we appreciate your time. Rex, enjoy LIV Miami.